prior to working at CPS, I was a teacher and a community organizer in the education space, so the focus on access to education is really important to me. These thorny issues of funding, geography, social inequality, and more are important to consider when it comes to access, and it's important that we find evidence-based solutions to these challenges, which create barriers for too many of our young people. As an alumna of Harris, I've seen firsthand how evidence-based approaches to policy can lead to results. However, sometimes policies are put in place by well-meaning people in institutions, but without the relevant data or input from all of the most affected stakeholders. As a result, these policies may actually be misguided and lead to unfortunate consequences. For example, when I first started at CPS, I managed a policy that's related to grade skipping, and this was a requirement from Springfield that all school districts across Illinois have to implement this policy. And it requires valid and reliable indicators in order to advance a student a grade, and that generally means standardized testing, and if you're in the education space, you know that standardized testing is not the most equitable way to look at a student's progress. So I believe that a closer consideration of data around student inequities and the inclusion of principal feedback would have given this policy a more favorable outcome. And while it was well intended, it did not have the impact that the creators likely hoped for. And so as we look to the future of education, we must do so with an eye towards equity, towards access and opportunity, and we must find solutions that work. This is not true just in CPS, but across the educational landscape. And so I'd like to thank Arnie Duncan, who headed up CPS and then later the U.S. Department of Education under President Obama, Professor Ariel Khalil, who leads the Behavioral Insights and Parenting Lab and was one of my professors when I was at Harris, and Martin Torres from the Governor Pritzker's office for being here today to partake in this very necessary conversation. And so please join me in welcoming our moderator for the evening from WBEZ, Natalie Moore.
Good evening. Thank you, Ali, for those remarks. Thanks to the panel for being here, and thanks for this big crowd. I think that you're quite the draw, Arnie.
Now these guys are. I'm just here.
So the first thing I want to ask you all just right out the gate is, what do you think of Chicago having an elected school board? I want to start spicy from the top.
Start at that end.
Sure. Yeah, no problem. So first of all, it's a pleasure to be here. I am an alum of the Harris School, and so whenever I get the invitation, I relish the opportunity to connect with the Harris School. We have 852 school districts in Illinois, and all but 2 other districts, which are under state control because they had some fiscal and governance issues, have an elected school board, from our smallest rural districts to U46 Elgin area, which is the 2nd largest district. We expect school districts to govern locally. We are a local control state in this regard. The state sets school standards. We allow school districts to determine curricula, right? They make hiring decisions. They determine salary decisions. They do collective bargaining. We put all of that power into the hands of local decision makers who are elected in every community in the state. And so Chicagoans having that opportunity seems like a natural phenomenon. It is the standard form of governance. You know, I know there is a lot of anxiety in different circles about what the political nature of what that means and how that will affect things and what the dynamic relationship is then between the mayor's office and the board. I'd say this plays out in every community, right? We have local mayors and we have locally elected school boards. This is how it works. Nobody's immune from politics. Local parents should have the opportunity to have a voice.
So I think we are always looking to better understand how schools and parents can cooperate to help support their children's learning. And I am not a school board expert, and I'm not going to make some prognostication about how things may stay the same or how they may be different, but we're going to have our eye on how parents who have various barriers to being involved in schools, to talking with teachers, to understanding how their kids are doing in the classroom, how a different kind of school board helps to solve those problems.
How, just to follow up with that, given the population of parents that you work with, what kind of opportunities do you see with an elected school board for those families?
Well, as Martin said, to the extent that these are more locally focused places, to the extent that parents have more trust and more confidence in thinking about understanding what their schools are doing and how they can become involved, know their teachers better know, as I said, what's going on in the classroom. I'm not sufficiently expert to know exactly what that would look like, but that's the theme of what we really hope to see happening.
I know you have a lot of questions, so I'll try and be brief. This is going to be a whole topic here, but I'll say we all desperately hope it's wildly successful, and we all got to roll up our sleeves to do whatever we can to have it be successful. Having said that, candidly, I'm pretty concerned for a couple reasons. One, how many is it, 20?
21?
Yeah, 21 seems outlandish to me, quite frankly. If you look at any nonprofit, any corporation, getting 21 people to manage something is unwieldy. And I worry that maybe it was set up to fail, which nobody wants, and it hurts kids, so I worry about that. And let me just, the structure of it, so obviously my 7.5 years worked under an appointed board, not an elected board. And there's a fair critique that may be less democratic. I would actually argue the other way, that because we were accountable to Mayor Daley, and he was accountable, if I did a bad job, if the board did a bad job, he would get fired. And so for me, there was direct accountability there. Where you have 21 members, how does the public know who's who, or sort of understand that? For me, it's much more opaque. It's less transparent. When I started at CPS, by definition, I was the youngest urban superintendent in the country. When I left to go to DC 7.5 years later, I was the longest serving big city superintendent in the country. That's not good. That constant turnover, I think it's 2.5, 2.6 years. No, again, business, nonprofit, any organization works well where the CEO turns every 2.5 years. And often that's because the boards and superintendents aren't aligned, and things go haywire. So we all got to be all in. That's the law. We got to do everything we can to help. But I desperately don't want CPS to take a step backwards. Our kids in our city can't afford it.
We're in this moment right now of a migrant crisis that is not abating anytime soon, and this is unprecedented. So I know that well, at least to me, it doesn't seem like there are many solutions that are out there, and we're living this in real time. But I felt like I have to ask this to you all, and Martin. We started talking about it a little bit on the way up here, because it's a local issue, it's a state issue, as well as a federal issue. How do you see migrants affecting these children, affecting public education?
Do you want me to start?
Well, let's kind of mix it up.
Yeah.
Ariel, let's start with you.
Well, I think I'd be, first off, super worried about the stress that those children and families are facing. And I think we know that that's going to shape not only their own opportunities for learning, or just and their parents' ability to help support that, but in classrooms with other kids, there are spillovers from one child's well-being to another child's well-being and opportunity to learn. And I think one interesting and important thing to look for is the composition of classrooms, and how are those children getting supported in their mental health and well-being, so that the ill effects of stress that we would expect to see don't spill over into the whole classroom and make it hugely difficult for teachers to manage that.
Martin?
When the state deals with problems and issues, we look at the data and we try to understand the nature of the problem. And the biggest challenge here is that on a daily basis, we don't know how many buses are going to arrive, or the composition of the people that are on those buses. Are they mostly adult males? Are they families with children? Right? What is this? Where are they coming from? What are their needs? The kind of first order of business as they come in is to go to a site, get triaged so that we can understand what their circumstances are, figure out what their healthcare needs are, figure out where they're going to be housed, where they're going to be fed. And then once all of those existential things are dealt with, then it is, well, if they have school-age children, do they want to stay here? And, let's start the enrollment process. The Illinois State Board of Education for months has been working both with CPS but with other districts to, one, make sure school administrators understand the rights of these students and these families, what they have to do for the enrollment, making sure the families understand their rights and what their children are going to be afforded. You know, the federal government has not provided Illinois or New York or DC, which have received the preponderance of these buses, with the resources needed to both fulfill their kind of basic human needs, and then with this, what their school-based needs are, right? I mean, whether it's social emotional learning or additional capacity on EL services, it is a challenge at the classroom level, and it's a difficult one to solve because you don't know what's coming at you, right? You don't know how many families, where they're going. And municipalities are you know, there's a lot of local strife around receiving families and what that means and the use of local resources. So I wish there was, you know, a response on the menu that we could easily go to here, but I think municipalities and states across the country are going to continue to struggle with this in the absence of real specific federal support.
Yeah, I'm no expert on immigration by any stretch, but I spend some time in police stations these days. I'm working on violence, so I'm spending some time with migrants, and I do a little bit of work in Haiti. And when you think about a family risking everything and taking their babies to try and go to a place where they have a better chance of living and when they're not getting shot at and they can maybe build a better life, we need to deal with those root causes back in those home countries. But man, these babies, we owe them our best. And these kids coming into CPS, the trauma and all that is real, language challenges, all that, but what an unbelievable opportunity to change the trajectory of these kids and their families' lives. And so I just think, whatever, you know, the resources are tough, that's a real concern, but we need to come together, and these babies deserve the best that every single one of us has to offer them. And so whatever we can do to get them a great education, to stabilize their families, to give them a chance to go to college and build a life for themselves. I just think about, you know, would any of us imagine getting on a bus to a place where you know no one and have no place to sleep, and what does that feel like? And you know, I watch kids brushing their teeth in the street before they go to school in the mornings now. These kids have been through a lot, and so whatever we can do to help them, we got to be all in.
Ernie, has your work with Chicago Cred changed you in any way in what you think needs to be done with public education?
Man, I don't get emotional up here. It's the hardest thing I've ever done. It's the most heartbreaking. It's also the most inspiring and meaningful work I've done. And so I'm learning every day. And it does nothing if it doesn't humble you. The question specifically, has it changed my perception of public education?
Yeah, or it sounds like it's changed you in other ways.
A lot of ways. That's probably not why we're here. I can do that except.
But however you want to answer it.
I'll answer very specifically. I was going to put Allie on the spot, something to think about. So what CPS has been asking me to do, which I will do, is when a child's killed, I go and meet with the family and talk and try and do some things. And I'm willing to do that. Jadine Chow's a good friend, and what I've been working with Jadine, who runs safety and security, is I talk to those families. It's obviously after the fact, but when you hear the stories, it's almost inevitable that those kids were going to get killed. The trajectory they were on was just going to lead to devastation. And what I've said is I can do that, but please let me meet the families of the kids most at risk before they get killed, before they take someone else's life, and let's see if we can bring them into our program and others like ours. And so we're starting to do that. So this is in real time to try and do something to change the trajectory of their lives. And the violence, unfortunately, is getting younger and younger. Our program was focused on 18 to 24-year-olds. We're now down to 13-year-olds because that's who's shooting and being shot. Not what I wanted to do, but what we have to do. The youth center on the south side, we're going to open a youth center on the west side this year. The very specific policy thing to think about, this is a hard one, is this is not a critique, obviously, it's not a critique of social workers, counselors, but they are not equipped to deal with the level of violence that these kids are dealing with and the amount of trauma, and they don't understand the street dynamics. What we do in our Chicago Cred program is we do a lot of things. We give everyone a life coach. And we always say experience can be the best teacher, but it doesn't have to be your own experience. You can learn from someone else's. So many of our life coaches have served 20, 30, 40 years, tragically missed the chance to raise their own kids, but they're come out and are raising the next generation. They're doing an extraordinary job. What I would love to do is put some of our younger life coaches into CPS schools, into the middle schools, into the high schools, to have a caseload of kids who are acutely at risk and need something else. The challenge, which I understand from CPS, is that the vast majority of our life coaches have criminal backgrounds, and that's an impediment to enter. But the way I feel about it is the kids that are literally the most at risk of dying now or killing someone else are absolutely missing out on the most important, the most valuable resource they can have. So I don't have an easy answer, we can talk later, but we have to figure out how to get the kids who need the most help the resources they need. And right now we're not, and the consequences of that are crazy. And just one anecdote, a million stories, I won't use his name, but one young boy, I just kept hearing his name. This kid was shooting up the neighborhood, was crazy. Went to the house, a boy opened the door, and I swear I don't think he was 100 pounds. He was like, I thought he was a younger brother. He was like this big and skinny as could be. And I thought he was gonna take me upstairs to meet his older brother. That was the kid that's shooting up the neighborhood. That's the kid that's creating havoc. And so we just have to come at this in a very, very different way much earlier. It's not every boy, it's not every girl, but there's a small percent of largely black boys, not only some Hispanic, some girls, who at 10, 11, 12, 13 are on the track to killing or being killed. We have to be honest about that, and we have to give them a different set of resources that we're not. So something for us to think about. I've been talking to Jadine about it.
Ariel, can you talk about chronic absenteeism? How does the problem, what's the origin of the problem, and what can be done to stop it?
So it is a big problem right now. It's an increasingly big problem after COVID. Lots and lots of absenteeism. We think that once you have a seat, we mostly study preschools in our research group, but getting a seat is only the first step. Actually being there every day is the important and necessary next step. And because chronic absenteeism hurts the child who is absent and also creates a lot of instability in the classroom and makes it hard for that child's peers to learn, makes it hard for that child's teacher to teach. The origins of the program are multifold, like most problems. Some are structural, so in the kind of preschool population in the city of Chicago, who has collaborated with us on our research study, we do find that transportation is an important problem. We find in the preschool programs, sort of half-day programs, are a real problem because a family can wake up and have a car breakdown or a transportation problem, or something happens such that you're late, and you're so late that half your half-day is gone and you just don't bother to go, and that is then that's counted as an absence. So are there these structural problems? And there's also a set of what I'm just going to say are non-structural problems that have to do with where parents would prefer that their kids are learning. Again, especially in the early years, who would parents prefer the child is spending the day with? How much parents think that their child is actually learning in preschool. So these are relevant, I think, to a younger set of kids, and I think the factors that shape absenteeism as we get into primary and secondary school are different, but it's a huge problem, and it's not getting any better, and I think it would be sort of number one on an agenda to think about.
Can you quantify how big of a problem it is, and what are the interventions around stopping it?
Okay, so in the city of Chicago and similar cities, I think at least 50%, or that's a ballpark estimate, of kids are considered chronically absent. It's a pretty low bar. It's missing 10% or more of the days, which is, missing only once every 2 weeks, and you're chronically absent. So I think it's a very, very large problem. And as I said, I don't know the numbers offhand, but Tom D. at Stanford has documented that post-COVID, this problem has exploded, and no one in some places actually knows where the kids are. In our work, we've done super simple things with parents of preschool age kids. We have tried to communicate with parents about the learning that is going on in the classroom, so that telling parents what their kids are missing out shifts parents' beliefs and attitudes. We have tried to give parents feedback on the amount of times that their kid actually has been absent. As I said, only once every 2 weeks you begin to forget 3 months ago that your kid was absent 3 days in 2 weeks. So we use administrative records to give parents that data in the hope that makes parents understand that where their child is. So we do super, super simple things to just try to shift behavior a little bit. Our programs have reduced chronic absenteeism by 20%, which still means that 30% of our population is chronically absent. We haven't solved the problem, but as I say, aside from structural issues that are big ticket items like you don't have a car to get to preschool, there are other approaches we can take.
And and not just with chronic absenteeism, how can schools best communicate with parents?
Well, that is a great question, because we believe that without doing so, we diminish the child's chance of success. Schools are partners with parents, and parents often don't know what's going on in their child's classroom. I think an important thing to do actually is to help parents better understand how their kids are doing in classroom. There's sort of a well-known phenomenon that parents prioritize kids' grades over, and I know, over and above the discussion we just had about the demerits of standardized test scores, parents place much less weight on that than they do the grades that their kids are bringing home. But grades can be compressed, they can be inflated, they can convey relatively little information. I think there's different ways of letting parents know how their kids are doing in ways that can then spur complementary parent behaviors in the home. If you think your child is doing absolutely fantastically, you might choose the 30 minutes of time you have tonight to do something else, because your child's already at the top of the scale. But that might not be the right information that will help predict how your kid does later in life. So we're working on questions of how do parents really understand how their kid is doing and how you can best convey that information to them.
Martin, what are the priorities for the state in addressing inequities within education?
Sure. I've been with the governor and the administration since he was sworn in January of 2019, and so I see the arc of the administration's work. And I think the context for when he entered office matters because it has laid the foundation for what's been possible over time. And so he comes into office with over $18 billion in unpaid debt from his predecessor, who decided that the state didn't need a budget for several years. And so, if you hear the governor talk about it, he'll talk about the cupboards being bare and having to deal with it. And so the first order of business was get the fiscal house in order, right? We got to pay down all of these unpaid bills. We have to pass a balanced budget, and then position ourselves to be able to invest in the things we care about, right? I'll kind of talk through the continuum from kind of birth on. For those of you who followed, Governor Pritzker in public life, one of his biggest passions has been early childhood education, right? Is where he's set up his philanthropic support, is where he's been a champion both nationally and locally. And, he'll talk about how he's gone to other chief executives and other U.S. senators and pitched them on the return on investment for early childhood. During his first term, we were really sidetracked from being able to make a big splash in early childhood because of the pandemic, right? It really colored most of his first term in office. So when he gets into his second term, and we're talking about his year 5 agenda, or the first year in his second term, he wanted to make early childhood a big priority. And so we came up with the agencies and informed by the Early Childhood Funding Commission, a multi-year plan for early childhood called Smart Start Illinois. And so in year 1 of this multi-year plan, investing $250 million more dollars. So we're increasing access to home visiting services and early intervention, providing rate increases for the providers in those sectors, because we can't offer the services if we don't have a robust set of providers ready to meet those needs. We're fundamentally doing childcare contracts differently so that we can strengthen that sector, right? We want to pay the provider themselves more, right? So instead of paying in arrears, we're paying up front to provide more stability. We've provided enough base funding to increase the hourly wages of childcare workers up to $17 to $19 per hour, which is a significant jump from where we are today. Now, that's not the landing point. That's not where we think it ought to be eventually, but we have to take pragmatic steps to get there. And then the vision is to eliminate preschool deserts across the state of Illinois, so that in every part of the state's geography, you'll have access to preschool services. And we have preschool deserts all across the state today. And so every new slot that comes in, we are going to and working with providers there. So in early childhood, we need to build the best birth to 5 system we can. We know it pays dividends down the road. K-12, it's 2 things. It's evidence-based funding, and it's addressing the teacher shortage. And in higher ed, it's college affordability. That is the North Star for us. We need to keep our students in state. We graduate about 140-something thousand students every year. A net majority leave the state to go to school. They're not going to the coasts. They're staying in the Midwest, right? They're going to Purdue. They're going to Michigan or Iowa. Those are kids we ought to be better competing for here in Illinois. So college affordability is both an ends in terms of making sure students aren't riddled with debt, but it's also a means to keeping them here so we have a better chance of them settling down, growing a family, starting a business.
Can you talk about areas in the state that have a dearth of preschools and why that is?
Yeah, mostly rural areas throughout the state where it's been difficult for, you need a provider network that's to build up on, right? So when we think about a preschool desert, we're talking about an area where they don't have enough publicly funded, whether it's state or federal, preschool slots to serve 80% of low-income students, right? So that's how we're kind of defining the nature of this. As we think about building up, we have childcare providers throughout the state. If we're gonna build these preschool centers, we wanna take a childcare provider and figure out how do we help them change the nature of their business so they can provide mixed delivery system of both childcare and preschool. It's more difficult than kind of starting a provider from scratch and building them up to, expecting them to provide a half-day or a full-day preschool program. But it's really about resources, right? The state of Illinois hasn't been able to invest in its birth to 5 system in the way that we'd want. Federal funding for Head Start isn't kind of exponentially growing. And so it's really the state's responsibility at this point to fund that birth to 5 system, and we're finally doing it.
Arnie, what do the young people you work with say about their experience in school?
Every story is different, so I don't, I never want to generalize or it's, complex. Was with a young man 2 nights ago who never went to high school, dropped out in 8th grade, and that's not wildly uncommon. So I love the high school interventions, but there's a set of kids that don't make it to high school, so we have to start earlier. I'll just give you one story, and this is one, so I don't, but one of our staff actually was one of our life coaches, now does our housing program. He grew up in a home that unfortunately, the conditions were so deplorable that he had huge scabs on his body. And when he went to high school, he was supposed to change into gym clothes for gym. And he was ashamed and embarrassed and refused to change. And he got labeled as an obstinate kid and a kid who defied authority. He ended up dropping out. Tragically, he ended up taking a life, served a number of years, has come out and done something different. But no one at school, I don't want to get emotional, no one at school ever asked him, why won't you take your clothes off? And had someone asked that question and had some sense of what he was dealing with, maybe he doesn't take that life. Maybe he stays in school and he has a very different trajectory. And so it's just, our kids are dealing with things that are, for better or worse, unimaginable for many of us in this room. And you really have to try and listen and understand and make yourself uncomfortable and be proximate. But I know how smart he is. I know how much good he's doing for the community now. But he created a lot of mayhem for a while and went through obviously tremendous trauma himself. But that was a kid that if someone had snatched him and really wrapped him up and figured out what was going on, a lot of lives would have been less negatively impacted.
Of course, there are going to be so many different stories
Yeah.
just by virtue of the number of young people you work with, but are there any common threads that you're picking up on?
Yeah, lots of threads. And again, it's just where we have to sort of adapt. One is just not feeling safe at school. And so people stop going because they just don't feel safe going there. Two, it doesn't feel relevant to them. And lots of people say it's great you're giving people a second chance. I actually sort of reject that. I think in many, many cases, it's actually a first chance that every institution, family, schools would ever let kids down. But many of our young men and women, because of their family situations, have to start making money at a very early age. My youngest, who's told me, he's also one of our former participants, now staff, said he had to start making money at 9 years old. That was his reality. And when you have to make money at 9 years old, there's only one person hiring. That's the guy in the corner. And so that leads you down a path. And so not every kid, but how the small percent of kids who need money, need clothes, need food, need something at 9, 10, 11, 12. The other guy said, I just got tired of hearing my mother cry at night. She couldn't pay the bills. I just had to go do what I had to do. They actually make a rational choice. And so how we think, and again, I understand child labor laws, but somehow we have to get some money and some clothes and some food to X number of kids, not a high percent, but if we don't do that, they have no alternative. They have no choice than to go make it a different way. And again, it's so much to ask of schools. It can't just be schools, it can't just be teachers, but schools as community centers and make that the centers of the neighborhood. And how do we all, nonprofits, churches, social services, how do we all wrap around those kids and those families who need something very different? Last thing I'll say, it's a little bit related to chronic absenteeism, but many of the kids who end up getting killed in CPS, one of the common denominators is they went to many schools. They're constantly moving, constant transitions because their home's in turmoil. So again, how do we flag that? How do we keep them connected to a school despite what's going on at home? Because you can have the best teachers in the world, but if you're in 4 different schools in a school year, it's impossible for that teacher to do a good job. So again, they're early indicators, they're warning signs that we got to pay a lot more attention to and get in there at an earlier age.
I'm really fascinated by this life coach concept because, I mean, there's a whole wellness industry around that with the different socioeconomic population.
Well, we always think, what works for the rich probably works for the not so rich. So yes, executive coaches, lots of people are making millions. So we have every one of our participants has an outreach worker, a life coach, a clinician, a tutor, and a jobs developer. So we try and do a base team. But that life coach is critical.
What are the life coaches doing differently from those other wraparound folks?
So everyone has a different role. So outreach team is basically our HR function. They recruit folks into our program because of their credibility in the streets. Clinicians, healing from trauma is absolutely the top of this list. I never want to say one pillar is more important than the other, but hurt people, but if we help people heal, they can not retaliate and not perpetuate these cycles of violence. We have lots of guys get high school diplomas. We just had a graduation of 84 folks, which is amazing. Some folks, again, never went to high school. Our oldest high school graduate was 63. And then we do a jobs piece at the back end. After a year with us, we spin people off into the legal economy. But the life coaches, I don't want to call it a surrogate parent. It's really not that. It's just that we have folks who have a lot of lived experience. Some of it amazing, some of it incredibly tragic. But you don't have to repeat all that yourself. If you can learn from both my strengths and my challenges, if we can sort of stand in that gap, then it changes how folks perceive their day-to-day and what their future might be. And sat in a room one time with a life coach and the participants. We added up, and together life coaches had served 269 years in jail. It's like, do we need to give one more day to the prison? Does anyone want to give one more day to the prison penal system? And if we don't, how do we take that experience, that lived experience, and do that? And our life coaches aren't just changing lives, they save lives. They literally save lives. And again, I think it's great for our guys who are 17, 18, 19, but there's a set of 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 who need somebody with that street experience and that relevance in the neighborhood. And we got to figure out how to better match that with CPS.
I know that you probably have to be a level 1 volunteer to get into the schools, like with the background checks, but have you approached CPS about this?
Yeah, this is real time, so I'm not
Okay.
but it's fine. So no, we're talking all the time, and again, there are ways that, again, I understand the background issue, so this is not easy, but can we have those kids, come to our centers or go to the park district and meet the life coach there? Can we get parental permission to do it at home? I think home visits are a huge piece of this. So for me, like, we can't say it's too hard and walk away, because again, these are literally kids who need the most help. We're not giving them what would help them the most. That's untenable. So we're figuring this out in real time. We're not at scale. And again, it's not every school, but it's a certain number of schools, middle schools and high schools in certain neighborhoods that could use 2 or 3 life coaches. And life coaches can be 25, 27, 20, they can be a younger generation that are very much still relatable to those young folks. So we're literally talking in real time and trying to figure this out together.
Ariel, what can parents do at home to support their kids?
I would like to answer that, but can I also just
Yes.
build on something that
Yes,
Arnie just said?
please.
Because I really want to just say that the literature on low-income kids and their development and their opportunities shows that one of the very most powerful things to help those kids is the presence of a supportive and caring adult. So that's a partial answer to your question, but it doesn't have to be a parent, which is sort of another answer to your question. And we talk a lot about early childhood, and I'm an early childhood specialist, I think. So I am very focused on early childhood, but in point of fact, if you look at all the literature on interventions and what is successful, the evidence from these kind of mentoring interventions in adolescence is extremely compelling. And these are, things that meet what we think of as the gold standard for evidence, which would be a very large-scale randomized controlled trial at scale. We have some we're still looking for those data points in early childhood, I have to say. But for the adolescent population that Arnie's talking about, Big Brothers, Big Sisters, hugely successful. Becoming a man, as you know, and the work you're doing. So I'm interested in 0 to 5, absolutely, but this is also hugely important. And what can parents, we ask parents to do lots of things. I'm also interested in what makes parents' jobs easier at home. I don't think parents have to do everything, but I don't think schools should do everything either, but parents need to be strong and steady presences, and kids need warmth and affection, and they need cognitive stimulation, and we're interested in how we can help parents do that regularly and without stress. And there's a whole variety of things we're thinking about.
Is there a role of technology in doing that work?
Yeah, we think so. We think that technology has made people's lives easier in lots of realms, and we can imagine that it might make parents' jobs easier too. So there's a whole world of technology for learning that we've been deeply interested in studying, and how it can help support parents to support their child's learning, how it can maybe take some of the pressure off parents to do everything. How it's attractive to parents to use high-quality ed tech technology that is inspiring to parents and children alike. So we believe there's a role for technology to help, and we're really trying to think about that. Of course, the problem with technology is that it's still really expensive. And there's huge inequalities in who has access to technology, from internet access down to apps that cost $9.99 a month. Even if these things are hugely effective and makes parents' jobs easier, that is our thesis, this will only serve to increase inequality across families if it's only the already advantaged who get to enjoy those benefits.
Martin, you mentioned teacher shortage as a priority. Can you talk a little bit more about what the state is doing to address that shortage?
Sure. First, I'll kind of zoom out to say the need for teachers is a national phenomenon. It is something that every jurisdiction, every state is dealing with. In Illinois, I think we're actually bucking some of the national trends. We have more teachers than we have had in the last decade. Teacher retention is improving. We have greater diversity in the teacher ranks. For those of you who are Trust But Verify, Advance Illinois just put out a report this morning, that says all of these things. So go check out the Advance Illinois report for a deep dive into the Illinois teacher pipeline. But I'll talk about where we are today, right? When we started this school year, there were over 3,500 teacher vacancies across the state. We have 852 districts. When we look at the data, more than 80% of those vacancies are concentrated within 20% of districts. So you have 170 districts that have the preponderance of vacancies, right? We can infer, right? You don't have to look at the data. I bet Arnie can tell you exactly what the composition and makeup of those districts are, right? They are districts that are primarily serving low-income students. So tier 1 or tier 2 school districts, and they don't have enough local wealth to provide them with the opportunity to compete in a competitive marketplace for teachers. We have teachers coming out of the pipeline every year, and what happens is the districts that have the greatest resources can offer the best salary, the best benefits package, and they never have a teacher vacancy, ever, right? And then you have these other kind of 20% of districts where we have a significant problem. We took a look at this and said, listen, the state needs to be more aggressive in this space. And so we work with the State Board of Ed, and the State Board of Ed has some subject matter experts who've been, leveraging some philanthropic support to study this issue for several years. And they've used some of their federal COVID dollars to do, affinity groups for teachers of color or principal mentoring or some retention programs. And we sat and we worked through all of these different things. And finally we said, we need to help these districts who are losing in the competitive marketplace. So we came up with a 3-year pilot grant program. It's $45 million a year, formula grant to these 170 districts. And we're giving them maximum flexibility similar to EBF, where they can determine how they want to use those dollars. If they want to do financial incentives to hire teachers, they can. If they want to do a grow your own model and take their paraprofessionals and upskill them to become teachers, they can do that, right? Or they can focus more exclusively on retention strategies for the teachers they have. The state of Illinois isn't going to tell them best how to use that. We're giving them the opportunity within some parameters to create their own story. We'll take the next 3 years to see how we do, but I'm excited to build on the increases that we're doing in evidence-based funding, and the conversation we had with the General Assembly on this, where we shined a very bright light on this, also allowed the state to increase its investment in the Minority Teachers of Illinois program, increase its investment in the Golden Apples program, right? So we sprung a conversation that inspired greater resources, not just for the governor's proposal, but for things that we already have. We're excited about what's going to happen.
We have about 10 minutes for questions, but before we get to that, I want to ask each of you to give some advice to the audience, because there may be people here who are interested in education policy and want to make a difference. So what advice would you give them, or where should they focus their efforts? Where's the need? We'll just go down the row. Yeah.
Don't overthink it. And I always say we need great people in schools, we need great people doing policy, we need great people at universities, we need great people in nonprofits, we need great people in philanthropy. There's no right, one spot you have to be in. Over the course of a career, it might make sense to be in different things. And just find a way to get engaged. If you can tutor, if you can mentor, if you have a skill that you love, that a passion that you would like to share with kids, don't over-intellectualize it. Just get engaged, and nothing's too big and nothing's too small. And again, there's so much need and so many great kids out here just looking for someone to take an interest in them and help to shape them. So dive in. If it doesn't work, try something else, but don't overthink it.
So I would just say, actually, I'm very inspired by something Arnie said, which is this concept of turning points. So child and adolescent development is not a linear process, and there are many opportunities, I think, both for ill and for good, for going off that, what you might think is a linear trajectory. And I guess I would just encourage more focus on that. How do we identify, as Arnie said, what is what's happening for a kid at age 9 that they're going to have to make this one choice, which is going to completely change the trajectory of their life? Or what is something that was implemented at this critical stage that completely put a child on a much better path? I think sometimes in research, we think of averages in big population groups and linear development, and I guess I would just encourage a focus on these really signature moments where an intervention can really make a big impact.
You know, I think I remember being in grad school at the Harris School and kind of having this question about what am I going to do and where do I want to make a difference. For me, I knew that it was going to be in government, in policy, and it was really just a matter of figuring out what unit of government I wanted to make a difference. But you're in a position now, if you're a student, you should, seek some advice from the people who are doing some of that work now, right? And talk to them about their journey, what they would have done differently, what they feel really good about. When you're in your early 20s, you have lots of room for error, right? You can go pursue something for a year or two and decide this is helpful to me, or this is actually the opposite of what I want to do. I want to go seek something different. But whatever spoke of the wheel you decide to be on, follow your instincts, follow your gut. You'll be fine.
All right. I think we have a mic going around for questions, so and try to make a question, not a long comment, so we can get as many people as we can hear in these 10 minutes.
Okay, I'll go fast. Hi, I'm Anna. I've been reading a bit about social emotional learning recently in Illinois, and I'm just wondering, how are you measuring the impact of that curriculum in the state? And if it's not performing as well as you would want it to, how are you making sure you're improving the curricula every year in the schools?
Sure. The state used a significant amount of its federal COVID relief dollars to support and create an SEL hub around the state so that school districts can receive services for their students through a local provider. I don't know that we're evaluating, right? I mean, the challenge here is that the state's trying to push dollars into services for students, and you have to ask yourself, if you're in government, how do you use the marginal dollar? Do I want to use 10% of the dollars that we have for research, or do I want to use 100% to push services out to students? It is a difficult decision to make, and I think the decision we made, and I think most states have made, is to push that out in services. I think that's the role of academia, that's the role of foundations to support, the nonprofit sector to go ahead and partner with districts to look at how do we measure success here, what's worth amplifying, replicating and seeking further government spending on.
Hi, my name is Gabby. Really quickly, you mentioned school board elections briefly. Arnie mentioned something about he's afraid it might have been set up to fail, something like that. I have the same fear because we're at this point in the year and we still don't even know what districts are running. There's very limited real information from the last time I checked. If something's changed, let me know. So I just want to know, in terms of Martin, I believe, with the state, is there any push to really make sure that this is a successful process? Because to get people engaged, especially if you're talking about getting parents engaged, these elections are supposedly not happening very far off from now. And does anybody here even know what districts are running, how you can do it, where they're at, who's organizing it? And that does make me feel that they're set up to fail. So that's my question.
Yeah, I appreciate the question. When the governor was running for office, the question was posed to him, will you support an elected school board? And he said he would. When bills were introduced, governor's office, I would just tell you, stood out of the fray, and this was really a conversation between the mayor of the city of Chicago and CTU and kind of local Chicago stakeholders. And at the end of the day, they passed the law that we have today. It's been amended a couple of times, but still kind of has the basic frame that it was passed with. I think the General Assembly has struggled with the creation of district boundaries, right? And there's been pushback to make sure that you have appropriate opportunities for people to select candidates of their choice that reflect the demographic population in the city of Chicago. And I think the General Assembly has had a difficult time kind of meeting the needs and asks of local stakeholders in Chicago. I'll say we have a different mayor today than we had when that was decided. I don't know that Mayor Johnson's administration is going to use its capital to try and push for a change in that at this point. I mean, I think that's a question for the administration on kind of what they want to do. The mayor just put out kind of his budget proposals and began the arc of what he wants to do from a policy perspective, and this wasn't included there. So
I think there's a hand back. I saw it, raised hand. Yes.
Right here.
Okay.
Hello. I would like to know if there are disparities in funding and/or resources between gifted or magnet programs and remedial programs in CPS. We've talked at length about crime, but do you all have data on the longer-term academic and economic outcomes of CPS students? And if these disparities do exist, are we fueling a racialized concentration of poverty by not considering the differences in resource allocation in CPS schools?
Do you want to take it? You want to take it?
I don't know if I have like the exact answer to that, but I worked on the admissions policy for 2.5 years. So I did a lot of public engagement around it, which involves obviously the selection component in magnet schools. And I think when we're looking around data around it, we didn't find, sorry, use my teacher voice also. We didn't necessarily find that students in magnet schools had like different outcomes, and funding, correct me if I'm wrong, I mean, Martin would know better, but it's like we still have per pupil, some per pupil funding. So in theory, we should have, the same, every student gets the same amount of dollars in select enrollment magnet schools. You find sometimes there's schools that there's things called friends of, so there's fundraising groups. And so some schools, when I was a community organizer, I was in a school and I was like talking to them about it, and they're like, yeah, our parents fundraised for a librarian. And I was like, what? And that was like $80,000 of money, and that doesn't happen at every school. So I can't really speak to the outcome differences. I pulled a lot, and my boyfriend also helped me pull a lot of data around selective enrollment, who's getting into schools. I put in a lot of work on working on that policy, and I know that's a priority for the district coming up in the next few years, even though I'm not working on it anymore. So I don't know if you all have a more...
I can add something to that. As a reporter and as a CPS mom whose kid goes to a Southside 90% Black selective enrollment school. So I started hearing about those friends groups and schools around here that were raising 6 figures in a night. So Sarah Karp and I did some research on that it's just another form. You can go on you can search it, I don't remember the numbers, but it is another form of disparities. And low-income schools get Title I money, but they don't have PTAs. They have parent resource groups, because what is the PTA's function? To raise money. And I was a silly parent who joined the PTA and was fundraising chair. These primary parents get burnt out very quickly. And, we went to 87th Street to the movie theater. We did a readathon, and, we did well, but nothing compared to some of these other schools, but also a lot. And we even said, well, maybe we should donate some of our money to schools surrounding, but I think that's like an untapped, which is why we did the story, to show, there are galas on the north side. We had popcorn on 87th Street.
This is our last question.
Okay, thank you guys all for being here. My name is Grace. So on the topic of education policy in regards to the oppressive policies that have been being passed, and mainly in the South, on regards to book banning and prohibition of certain topics such as critical race theory and gender topics, how would you say someone who's young or just anyone who might want to work in the government or policy field, how can we help rectify or help push back against these policies that are being made, especially because it is, again, while it's happening in the South, I do see it being able to trickle down into the rest of the nation as well. So what are some recommendations you have on that?
I'm happy to give an opinion. Thinking about it a lot, talking to folks in Florida and Texas and down south. Again, this is my pushback on me, whatever. These policies are very intentional. They're very strategic. They know exactly what they're doing, and they're not going to back down. So for me, it's not a policy argument that's going to convince them to see the light and say we shouldn't whitewash American history or we shouldn't, do whatever. They're going to keep doubling down and doubling down. That's the playbook. And so my honest opinion is that it's not about policy. It's not about research. People have to vote, and they have to change those elected officials. There has to be a price you pay. And I desperately hope that the parents in Florida are appalled by what's being taken away from their kids, and that there'll be a price for having done these kinds of things. And so for me, it really is not an intellectual policy argument. This is politics, and I've never yet seen someone say, "Oh, I was wrong about that," and we shouldn't ban books, or I was wrong about that, and CRT that doesn't exist in schools isn't the boogeyman. They create fear. Fear is a powerful motivator. They create a lot of fear. It's a great parent empowerment tool. It's just very, very destructive to kids and to our democracy. So for me, I just would encourage folks, across the country that you have to not elect elected officials where that's their agenda.
Yeah. I agree with the secretary, and I was speaking to a group of philanthropists recently, and talking about kind of their role in this, and they want to be a part of change. And well, how do we do this? And you really need to invest more in organizing and local, because the ground game is being played community by community, and there are like pseudo electronic news outlets, right? The Naperville Gazette or the Brookfield whatever, and it's all misinformation. It's all propaganda pushing CRT or anti-LGBTQ things. So the war is being waged locally, and fear and division is the goal. They're not trying to have a highbrow policy conversation. They're trying to divide. They're trying to distract, right? It is culture wars. It's an old playbook, right, in politics. I am proud, the governor is proud that Illinois is the first state in the nation to outlaw book banning, right? One of the first states in the nation to require a unit of instruction on LGBTQ history. One of the first states in the nation to require a unit of instruction on Asian American history, right? So, I mean, there are some policy things that we can do to foster a more expansive curriculum in Illinois, at least, and it'll be different state by state. But the victories are going to be had at the state level, and the fight's going to be at the ground level, at the municipal level, and voting is how you win.
Well, we are out of time. Thank you all for your thoughtful questions, and thank you to our panelists.
Great job.